नमामि धन्वन्तरिमादिदेवम् सुरासुरैर्वन्दितपादपद्मम् लोकैर्जरारुभय मृत्युनाशम् धातारमीशम् विविधौषधीनाम्।
Namaskar. On behalf of Charak Samhita Research, Training and Skill Development Center, a MOU partner IPGTRA Gujarat Ayurveda University Jamnagar, I welcome you all in this last day, 5th day of Expert Talk series on concept of health. Today, we are having two young scientists with us, eminent scientists with us, Dr. Professor Kishore Patwardhan and Dr. Supriya Bhalerao. Dr. Kishore Patwardhan will deliver his talk on how to write scientifically with impact, and Dr. Supriya Bhalerao will talk on the topic applied researches on health. It's my privilege to introduce Professor Kishore Patwardhan. He is the icon in the youth in the research field of Ayurveda. He is currently the professor in Department of Kriya Sharir, Faculty of Ayurveda, IMS BHU Varanasi. He has done doctoral work on identifying various issues, concerns, and challenges of Ayurveda education, which he executed through a nationwide survey that involved Ayurveda students and teachers. He is involved in developing and evaluating different teaching learning methods for Kriya Sharir. The research interests include Ayurveda biology, Ayurveda education, and policies on higher education. He has lectured in India and abroad on various topics such as Ayurveda physiology, academic writing, research methods, educational research, and education policy. He has received Ayush-sponsored Vaidya Scientist Fellowship and Dr. C. Dwarikanath Award of Indian Association for the Study of Traditional Asian Medicine for the year 2019. He is the editor of the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine and work as member of scientific advisory committees of IPGTRA, CCRAS, and School of Life Sciences, MAHE. To his credit, he has published 30 good quality research papers which are available. I will request all the essay participants and learners of Ayurveda to see the link of ORCID given on the slide. And he is also the core committee member of a wonderful network of lectures, Ayurveda Network BHU. I will request all the participants also to access the link to have the wonderful presentations from eminent speakers. I request Professor Kishore Patwardhan sir and welcome him to deliver his talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Yogesh, for having given me this opportunity and also those words of kind introduction. I also thank Dr. Gopal Vasisht for having invited me for this session. So I will be directly. The topic that was given to me was how to write scientifically with impact. So I have taken this with impact under brackets because I want to emphasize this impact. So first, let me talk about impact, and then I'll come to the topic of how to write scientific papers, right? So what is impact? Again, impact might differ from person to person and context to context. So there cannot be a uniform definition of impact. So in what form do you publish your work? That will also determine the impact that your work is likely to have, and what kind of work you have done. This is also one more important aspect that will determine the kind of impact that is likely to have. And who are your target readers? Whether the impact is measurable or immeasurable, or the one that is not measurable. And then where you publish your work, whether it is in scholarly journals, whether it is in the form of books or in periodicals and newspaper articles. See, each can have some impact, or the type of impact might vary. For example, we know that some great books have had immense impact on entire humanity. Maybe Bhagavad Gita, for example, or maybe any other book for that matter. Such books have had immense impact on entire humanity. So the measuring the impact becomes very difficult. What is the impact of Ramayana? Can we measure it? It is immeasurable, right? What is the impact of Gandhi's book on his the autobiography? What is the impact that it has had on thousands of people? We cannot measure it. What is the impact of Vivekananda's writing? We cannot measure this impact. So the term impact is a bit vague, and so that is why I took up this term impact at the beginning, so that I can define the impact as per my convenience and what I can tell you in the span of 1 hour, right? So the periodicals, some you know that some articles written in even newspapers by some eminent scholars, they might have immense impact on maybe policy making or maybe public opinion building. So, but the kind of impact that we are going to discuss is not that. The kind of impact that we are going to discuss is the impact that our work is likely to have on the progress of science. That is the definition of impact with which we will be talking today, right? And that is why we won't be discussing about books, periodicals, newspaper articles, and so on. So we will be restricting our talk to scholarly journals. So how to publish your work or how to write your article, especially the research article. Again, I won't be going into the articles such as review articles or opinion articles, which is again a tricky thing. And as you gain expertise, you will be gaining those skills of writing different kinds of articles. But as a research scholar or as a student of research and as a beginner, especially this talk is aimed at beginners in science and beginners in the research field. Maybe PhD scholars, maybe MD AY or MS AY scholars, or maybe newly joined teachers who are likely to guide their students or supervise the thesis work. So this is aimed at those audience. So I have defined my audience, and I have also defined the kind of talk that we will be having. Okay. So again, one or two short sentences can be added here, that when do you write a book and when do you write a scholarly article? When whenever you have got some strong opinion and whenever you want to add some advocacy point of view to your work, then you better write a book. Because a small article or short article or scientific article may not suffice, and it may not do justice to your thoughts. So when the material that you want to accumulate is huge, and whenever you want to do some comprehensive work, it is always better to go for book, not a research paper. But whenever you want to convey the message in a concise form, maybe within few pages, right, then it is always better to go for scientific article. And that always depends on the interests of the person who is writing the work, right? So one interesting and important fact I would like to emphasize is where to publish your research. So now we have restricted our discussion to research work, right? So we are not going to discuss about something that is like opinion articles, right? We are discussing on research work. So where should you publish research work? So there are two sets of literature. So one set of periodicals, for example, these are certain kinds of periodicals that look very attractive, colorful, right? But they are not peer reviewed. They are not scholarly literature. This is called whereas there are two types of literature, as I told you. So one is popular literature, another one is scholarly literature. So we will be discussing in our talk, the kind of literature that is depicted in this picture, that is scholarly journals, right? So what's the difference between popular literature and scholarly literature? So popular literature is usually, they contain the shorter articles and they provide broader overview, and authors often, they are not experts in the subject, and often names and credentials of authors are not provided, and the articles are written in non-technical language, and articles do not follow a specific format or structure, and articles are not evaluated by experts in the field, but they are evaluated only by the editorial board. Right? This is the fundamental feature of popular literature. Whereas in scholarly literature, the articles are always usually longer and comprehensive and in-depth. They provide in-depth analysis of a topic. Then authors usually are the experts or specialists in the field, and always the names and credentials are given. And such articles are always written in technical or scientific language, and they always follow the structure, that is IMRD, introduction, material methods, results, and discussion, of course, including abstract and bibliography. So all this is always a part of a scholarly article, right? And articles are reviewed and critically evaluated by a board of experts in the field. So that is the fundamental difference. The popular literature is not peer reviewed, whereas scholarly literature is peer reviewed. So I won't be discussing much further about these literature and classification of literature. So now I'll directly come to the type of typical parts of a scientific paper. We will consider only the original articles or research papers. We won't discuss about reviews or opinion articles and so on. Okay. So fundamentally, these are some of the important parts of any published research. So first is title, and title happens to be the most frequently read part of any published paper, because whenever you search on PubMed or maybe Google Scholar, the first thing that is displayed is always title. Only when you click the title, then the abstract may be displayed, and only when you further show your interest, then you might be able to get access to the full article as such, right? Otherwise, the title happens to be the one that is most frequently read part of any published papers. That is why writing title requires some expertise and some skill. I'll come to that later. And then comes authors and their institutional affiliation, then abstract, keywords, introduction, material methods, results. Of course, results include tables and figures also, and discussion and acknowledgement and references. So these are the typical parts of any published research article. Now we will go one by one, and we will have some important hints of writing these individual parts of the paper, right? So title should be complete, specific, and should cover the central idea of your paper. That is how your title should be written. Should include the keywords or key methods such as survey or double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial or observational study, etc. Whenever you are following a particular kind of study design, that material, the methods should be there in the article title, so that you will have, the readers will have the exact idea of what your article is all about. Independent and dependent variables should be written in the article. For example, the effect of Guduchi on Prameha, right? So Guduchi may not be the right thing to write. Rather, Tinospora cardifolia, and in the brackets you can write Guduchi. And prameha, instead of prameha, you can write diabetes mellitus as such, and in the brackets you can write prameha or whatever you are taking, right? So independent and dependent variables, name of species if not human, and of course do not use abbreviations, jargon, chemical formulae, series identifiers, etc. in the title. Now title should convey the central idea, and writing title requires some skills, and always you can exercise your creativity. You can show your creativity in writing the title. I'll show you one or two examples. So immunomodulatory, neuroprotective and longevity enhancing effects of Emlica officinalis in mice is a better title than evaluating the Rasayana effect of Amalaki. Why? Because the reader, you cannot assume the reader to have a background of Ayurveda and these Sanskrit terminologies. Okay, so you assume that your reader is someone who is not an expert in your field, and you want to convey, you want to reach that audience as well, and hence evaluating the Rasayana effect of Amalaki is not a good title for your paper. Rather, maybe you can use Rasayana and Amalaki in parentheses, in brackets, but what you have actually done in your work, that should be reflected in the title. Maybe if you have worked on immunomodulatory effect or neuroprotective effect and maybe longevity enhancing effect, that should be reflected in the title instead of writing simply the Rasayana effect of Amalaki. So these are certain small tips that one need to keep in mind while writing title. Similarly, how did Sushruta treat malaria? Maybe better than the concept of Jvara in Sushruta Samhita. If you are writing a review paper on the concept of Jvara in Sushruta Samhita, then better avoid that title. Rather, make it more interesting. How did Sushruta treat malaria, or how did Sushruta treat typhoid? That looks more interesting, right? So now, in the clinical research, the title should always include the setting, patients, intervention, comparator, endpoint, and the study design. These are essential parts of any study that any title that involves clinical trials or clinical studies, right? So these are must. And again, there are several guidelines that are already available. For example, if you are doing some random clinical trial, you have to follow the consort guidelines. If you are doing some observational study, you have to follow strobe guidelines, right? So depending on those guidelines, the specific requirements of title are given in those guidelines also. You have to check those checklists, and then accordingly you have to write the title, right? You cannot use your autonomy to write the title, because this is a scientific article, and these scientific articles have to follow certain specific guidelines, and those guidelines have already mentioned the important factors or entities that should be mentioned in the title, right? You should therefore refer to these guidelines beforehand, before writing the title. Avoid the institution's name or number of cases in the title. Avoid interrogative titles. Avoid declarative title. For example, grapeseed extract prevents skeletal muscle wasting in interleukin 10 knockout mice. So here the article is actually, the title is actually the results, right? It doesn't reflect what was studied. Okay, so title should reflect what was studied. Instead of giving the results, you should write what did you study. So coming to abstract. So reader should get the central idea of the paper by reading the abstract. And abstract should always be brief, should state the problem and hypothesis, should state the methods, should summarize the results, should include inferences of the study, and also it should avoid generally known and general factors, right? This is the best hint to frame your abstract. So roughly about 10% of abstract should be dedicated to introduction or background. So what was the purpose of doing your study? Around 30 to 35% of your abstract should be dedicated to material and methods. So what was the study design? what techniques did you use, what statistical methods were employed. So all this should be there. Then results, what are the most important findings? So around 35 to 45% of the entire abstract should be given, should be allocated to describing your results. And then conclusions, why are the results important? That should be around 20 to 25%. And if you follow this this distribution of weightage, then obviously your abstract will be very interesting and will be readable. And that is how you want your abstract to be. You want more and more readers to read your abstract, is it not? So the goal of an abstract is to give maximum information in minimum space, because there are always word limits for any abstract. Depending on the journal, there are always word limits. The word limits might vary from 150 to 300 words or 250 usually, not more than that. So in restricted amount of words, you have to convey the most important results and also most important idea that has emerged from your study, right? So the important principle that one should keep in mind while writing the abstract is maximum information in minimum space. Okay, so there are two types of abstracts, structured and non-structured. So structured, usually in structured abstracts, you can use the titles like background, introduction or background, and then methods, then this results and discussion, or maybe the conclusion. So these titles you can use, but in unstructured abstract, you are not allowed to use further subheadings. The entire paragraph should be in a single paragraph. Entire abstract should be in a single paragraph, and it should be in running language. But of course, these particular segments or sections of your article, like IMRD, should be there in the abstract, and this particular sequence also should be followed. Only thing is that you won't be allowed to write these subheadings. Otherwise, the structured and unstructured abstracts are almost similar. Again, the word limits might vary. In structured abstract, usually 250 words are allowed, and unstructured, again, sometimes only 150 words may be allowed. And this is typical for European journals, whereas structured abstract is very common for North American journals. But again, this is not a hard and fast rule, and journal to journal variation is always there. And what makes an abstract good? So always the abstract should follow the guidelines of the journal and stands alone, right? And it is an independent unit of information, and it should be accurate and check for inconsistencies and omissions. It should be readable and coherent, and it should include the specific data. Then only you can call an abstract to be a good abstract. Then these are certain steps which have been advised to be followed while writing the abstract. So identify the guidelines of the journal first. Then highlight the key features in your paper. So usually abstract is written always at the end. After you have completed your paper, then you write abstract. Then so highlight the key features in your paper, right? So whatever you want to highlight, and then insert sentences into abstract format. Then write, revise, and condense, and then edit sentences and words, and check the final thing. Right? That is how the abstract is written. So abstract is always written at the end, though it appears at the beginning. Even the title is also written at the end. So title and abstract, though they appear at the beginning of any paper, but mostly all experts, they advise that they should be written at the end, because you know what to write, right, after finalizing your paper. So this is one example. Do you find this abstract all right? Ayurveda is one of the most ancient healthcare systems in the world. The term Ayurveda consists of two words, Ayu and Veda. Ayu means life and Veda means knowledge. Therefore, Ayurveda means the science of life. In Ayurvedic literature, immunity has been described as ojas. This is of two kinds, para and apara. In the recent years, immune system related disorders are being increasingly recognized, and the role of immunomodulatory drugs is being highlighted. In Ayurveda, Rasayana drugs are described to have immunomodulatory effect. The present study aims at evaluating the role of Amalaki as an immunomodulatory agent in animal model. details are explained in the paper. So is this abstract fine? What is the problem with this abstract? So if you carefully observe, it states many generally known facts and already accepted things, right? And most of the abstract is occupied by introduction, right? Whereas introduction should not exceed some maybe 10 to 20% or 25% of abstract, right? So more introduction means you are reducing your own space for writing your results, right? So actually in this abstract, only one sentence is worth retaining, right? The present study aims at evaluating the role of Amlaki as an immunomodulatory agent. That is how the abstract should begin, possibly. That is the first sentence of the abstract, or maybe one more sentence of introduction may be there, but not more than that. Okay. So while writing abstract, please keep in mind that your abstract should contain the major findings of your paper. You should not write that details are explained in the paper. No. Details, the maximum or summary of the details should be explained in the abstract itself. Especially, this is a very common language that our scholars use when they submit abstracts to the conferences. Again, this is a very a practice that has to be discouraged, right? You cannot say that details will be explained in the paper or will be explained during the conference. No, this should not be the case, right? Whatever important details you want to share, they should be written in the abstract itself. Then coming to keywords. So third aspect or third component of a research paper is keywords. So usually what I suggest you is not to repeat the words which are already there in the title and abstract as keywords, because keywords give diversity to your paper, right? More diverse users or readers, they should be able to read your paper. So that is how you increase your visibility by offering more diverse terms as keywords. So if the terms are already there in this title and abstract, they're already indexed. There is no meaning in giving the same terms under keywords, because keywords, they give an opportunity for you to add extra terms, right? Extra words for searching. So to a the person who searches for your article, he always uses or she always uses keywords, right? So users search a database by keying in the keywords. So more diversity in keyword selection means more visibility. And if you are not sure, then use mesh thesaurus, medical subject heading, which are present on the this thesaurus is available on PubMed. So you can search on PubMed for mesh terminology. For example, autistic disorder is the preferred term over autism, right? Autism is not a mesh term. Autistic disorder is a mesh term. So better always use mesh terminologies while using keywords. That will once again add to your visibility, right? Diversity and visibility. So if the title contains Ayurveda, use traditional Indian system of medicine as your keyword. If the title contains lung function test, use respiratory parameters as your keyword, and so on. So that is how you can increase the diversity and visibility. Now coming to the IMRAD component. So IMRD. I stands for introduction, M stands for methods, R stands for results, and D stands for discussion. This concept was originated by Pasteur, and it was established by American Standards Institute in 1972. And afterwards, all the journals now they follow this IMRAD structure. Of course, some journals they might include methods at the end, right? And most of the journals they follow this particular sequence IMRD. But there are some journals that ask the authors to write methods at the end, right, after completion of the paper. But such journals are very few in number, right? Then IMRAD is a format, and of course each paper will differ, right? So what do you mean by IMRAD, and what is the actual meaning of IMRAD, and what should be there in each of these sections? So introduction means asking a question. So you ask a question, and so what is the question? Why did you ask the question? Right? All this should be there in introduction. So asking a question, right? It should go into introduction. Attempt to answer the question, that should go into material and methods, right? How did you approach the question? What methods did you choose, right? Results, obtain and compile the data, right? That should be the meaning of results. And answer to the question, that should go in discussion. Often, the most of our students, they make this error, they make this mistake of repeating the results in discussion section. They often don't know the difference between results section and discussion section. No, discussion section is where you give answer to the actual question that you had asked in your introduction section, right? So that is how the IMRAD structure has to be formulated. Now, introduction. So what should be there in introduction? So based on what was known and unknown, why did you do this study? So you ask these questions to yourselves and then you write answers to these questions, and that becomes introduction. Very simple, right? I expect that you read these slides once you complete your research, and just before you start your paper writing, then you please study these slides so that you will be it will be very helpful for you to write paper. So while writing introduction, ask these questions to you based on what was known and what was unknown. Why did you do this study? So start with what was known, then explain what is unknown, and then write why did you do this study? What was the research question? What was the tested hypothesis? What was the purpose of the research? So all these questions should be answered in your introduction. So introduction should contain the statement of the problem. Maybe there can be around 3 to 4 paragraphs of introduction, right? And well structured introduction will always be a pleasure to read, because if a person is not interested in the further details of the paper, right, the person should be able to get the gist of your work by reading the introduction. That is the purpose of introduction. So clearly state the problem or objective of your work. Then ensure that the problem is specific, important, and relevant. State the previous work related to the problem. State the lacunae in the current understanding of the problem. Explain clearly how is your work different from the one that already exists, because this is one more very common error that our students commit. They just repeat the work that has already been done, and they are often unable to justify taking up the same work that has already been done. There has to be some justification always. If you want to repeat some work, then there has to be some justification. Maybe you have modified some methods, or you have taken care of some limitations that were there in the previous study. So there has to be some explanation and justification for you to repeat some others' work. Okay, so that has to be mentioned. Statement of hypothesis. Okay, sometimes you may not have hypothesis. Sometimes very preliminary studies may be performed, or exploratory studies. Often they help in generating the hypothesis. So in such cases, you may use the term objective. Okay, for example, you don't know if the autonomic function tests, right, if they vary according to Prakriti or not, you don't know. So that becomes a hypothesis only when you have got some preliminary data. So you can generate preliminary data by using the term like exploratory study. Objective is to see whether the autonomic function tests vary according to Prakriti or not, right? That could be the objective. And then after getting the data, you may hypothesize. Yes, so there may be a relationship between maybe the sympathetically dominant reflexes or sympathetic dominance may be there in certain kind of Prakriti. Parasympathetic dominance may be there in some other kind of Prakriti. But you to hypothesize this, you need some preliminary data. So exploratory study can be done where you may not have hypothesis, but you may have simply an objective to generate hypothesis, right? So hypothesis is always not a must in each and every study. You can simply do the study to generate hypothesis. Okay, so ensure that the existing literature supports your hypothesis. Then state briefly the methodology followed in your study. So steps to follow: begin with what is known, state what is unknown, state what did you hypothesize, and end with what your study is going to answer. So these are the steps to follow while writing introduction. If you follow these steps, writing introduction is very, very easy, right? So writing introduction often is difficult. Our students feel it difficult because they don't know what to write. They simply review the entire literature in the introduction section. No, that is not what is expected in introduction. In the introduction should be about your work, not about something else. Okay. So these are certain common problems that we encounter while we check the papers that are submitted to different journals. So research question is not specific, or multiple and unrelated questions are addressed simultaneously. Too many research questions which are difficult to address in single paper, right? Key arguments are not backed up by appropriate references. Yes, there has to be always good references to support your key arguments. Otherwise, there will always be questions. The stated aim of the paper is vague or biased. For example, can you write like establishing the effect of Amalaki on immunological parameters? Is this correct statement? Establishing the effect of Amalaki on immunological parameters. So if you write this, it means that you are already convinced that Amalaki has got some immunological effect on immunological parameters, and you just want to establish it. Rather, so this shows your bias. So instead of this, what you are supposed to write is evaluating the effect of Amalaki. So you assume a neutral position. Always you assume a neutral position. You don't show up your bias. Maybe you are biased. Every one of us is biased, but that bias should not be reflected in our writing. And when doing science, when doing research, our bias should not be reflected in our work. Okay, so evaluating the effect of Amalaki. That is how you just modify your title, or this objective, right? Then introduction is too long and unnecessarily reviews the entire literature. This is a very common problem that we encounter. Too many adjectives and inflated statements. Like Ayurveda is the most ancient and most authentic healthcare, documented healthcare ever documented in the history of human mankind. You don't need such adjectives. You don't need to use such adjectives, right? Amalaki has been a wonderful herb with astonishing effects. No, don't use such adjectives. Be realistic and be factful, right? So such adjectives and inflated statements always they irritate the reviewers, right? Coming to methods. When, where, and how did you do this study? So I suggest that research scholars or maybe PG students, they should write the methods at first. So first section of a research paper that is to be written is always methods. And scholars, they have to write this because they have done their work. They are the ones who do this work, right? So they know how did they do. So what did they do? How did they procure the drug? How did they confirm the identity of the drug? Right? Raw materials, from where did they procure? And then what test were they subjected to? Then how did they randomize the patients? Right? What randomization technique was used? Right? How many groups were there? How was the allocation was done into different groups? So all this is something that you know because you have done this. So writing method section is one of the easiest things, easiest tasks in writing research paper, right? So who was included in the study groups? What materials were used? What statistical methods were used? So all this should be written in methods. So state clearly the settings, population, sampling strategies, instruments, data collection methods, and analysis strategies. Provide justification for the appropriateness of the methods employed if unconventional. Of course, you can use unconventional methods, but you should be able to justify them. Without justification, if you use unconventional methods, they are likely to be questioned, right? So provide the readers with sufficient details so that the study may be reproduced. Ensure that the technical terms really match with the actual methods followed. See, why one needs to write methods in details? It is always to be kept in mind that you are helping some other person to reproduce your study and to verify your results. If someone wants to verify your results, then that study needs to be reproducible. So to ensure that a study is reproducible, the methods section needs to be written very, very meticulously and in a very detailed manner, right? Then only one will be able to reproduce your study. Otherwise, if you skip certain steps, then the same study may not be able to be replicated or reproduced. And reproducibility is one of the hallmarks of any good science. And if your science is unable to be replicated, then there has to be some problem, right? There will be some problem with you, with your science. So always keep in mind that the methods section should be so detailed that anybody should be able to replicate your study. Then ensure that the technical terms really match with the actual methods followed. For example, randomly selected. See, randomization is a technique that we use and it has to be followed in a systematic manner. And randomly doesn't mean haphazardly, right? Randomly selected doesn't mean haphazardly selected. Randomization is a highly sophisticated technique and you need to follow this. Whenever you write randomly selected, it has to mean randomization, and you need to explain how the random sequence was generated. Maybe computer assisted random sequence was generated. Maybe Excel sheet offers you the features to generate random sequence, right? So, but you should be able to mention and you should be able to explain that. So, for example, in a published paper, maybe these are certain sections that have to be found in methods. So, methods adopted for the study, population, specific criteria considered for inclusion, sample, maybe sample size, right? Calculation of sample size, for example, preparation of preliminary questionnaire, validation of the questionnaire for reliability and consistency, collection of data, response rate. So all this should be, if this was a survey, then all these points should be there in the methods. So these are certain crucial details which often are missing in the papers submitted for different journals. Sample size calculation, method of random sequence generation, details of the blinding procedure, preparation of compound drug, maybe simply writing that Kukkutaputta was given or Bhavana was given is not sufficient. The details of this should be there. What was the temperature range that was achieved? Okay, then maybe Bhavana, which drug was used, how much of the drug was used, for how many time, for what duration the Bhavana was given. So all these details have to be written. Identification methods of raw herbs, orchard specimen retained or not, rationale of placebo controlled trial. See, though this placebo controlled trial is considered to be the golden standard of clinical trials, but always it may not be ethical. For example, you cannot go for a placebo controlled trial in snake bites. In the cases of snake bite, right? You cannot ask the person who has had a snake bite to be enrolled in a placebo controlled trial. That will be unethical. So rationale for placebo controlled trial should be mentioned and described. Then clinical trial registration. It is something very essential. CTRA, Clinical Trial Registry of India, is the agency that registers the clinical trials. Before enrolling the first patient in your clinical trial, you should be having this registration of your study in this portal. You should have ethical clearance. You should have informed consent. All this should be mentioned in the paper. Simply having this is not sufficient. You should write this in your paper. That is something often missing in many of our papers that our students write. So these are some important guidelines. Of course, there are many guidelines. You should be aware of these guidelines before starting the study itself, right? Yeah, some important like start statement, consort extensions. For example, herbal medicines. If you are using some herbal medicines, then consort extensions for herbal interventions is there. Okay, the Strobe statement for observational study, Prisma for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Right? For example, start statement, diagnostic accuracy. For example, if you are doing some work related to maybe Tailabindu Pariksha, it is something of diagnostic importance, right? So in such cases, you should follow the start statement or start guideline. So all these guidelines are available in this portal. This is called Equator Network, equator-network.org. So this is the website where all kinds of the guidelines have been made available. You can simply search for your the kind of study that you want to do, and you can finalize the guideline that is applicable for your study. Okay, there is something called toolkits where it gives you certain options, and you can go on entering your the factors that are applicable for you, and you can go on doing this, and finally you will reach to particular guideline that is applicable for you. So it is very, very helpful tool. So methods could be innovative, of course. Like this is a paper that all Ayurvedic scholars should be aware of. The double-blind randomized controlled pilot study comparing classic Ayurvedic medicine, methotrexate, and their combination in rheumatoid arthritis. And see, this is how they wrote this. Before the start of the study, Ayurvedic physician provided a list of all possible medicines that he might use in individualizing the therapy over the course of the study. And this list contained 148 separate multi-herbal compounds. However, they were contained within 6 dosage forms of Ayurvedic pharmacological medicine, like decoction, powder, pills, jam, herbal wine, and herb-infused oil. So each dosage form included more than 20 multi-herbal compounds, and they prepared 6 types of placebo. So this is one of the first studies that was carried out while keeping the individualization aspect of Ayurvedic therapy intact. Otherwise, what we do is we simply copy the Western medicine methods, right? They do maybe rofecoxib or celecoxib in osteoarthritis. So we replace celecoxib with the Yogaraj Gugulu or with some other Gugulu, and then we do the study. See, this is not how Ayurveda is practiced. That is where this huge gap exists between the way how Ayurveda is practiced and how Ayurveda is researched, right? So this study is one of the important studies where the individualization is kept intact. The autonomy of the physician to prescribe whatever he wants to prescribe in a given set of patient, irrespective of the disease, right? So in Ayurveda, maybe 10 patients suffering from same disease might receive 10 different interventions based on maybe dosham, dusham, balam, kalam, desham, dusham, balam, kalam, analam, prakritim, vaya, sattvam, satmyam, tathahara. So several factors are there which are considered while prescribing, while finalizing our prescription. So this is called individualization. And if this is how we practice, then this is how we should also be doing our research. But unfortunately, we do the research as per Western medicine, and we practice in some other manner. And that is why our research and our practice doesn't match with each other. So this is one of the important studies that one has to read and one has to understand. I won't go into the details of this. Then methods, interventions, and instruments are not described in the details. So this is one of the, again, another common problems of the papers submitted to our journals. Shirodhara was performed once daily is not sufficient. At what time of the day, what was the duration, what was the clinical setup, all this should be mentioned. Coconut oil was used as placebo in control group, patients with atopic dermatitis. So in such cases, you need to justify why of coconut oil being used as placebo. You should be able to say that coconut oil doesn't have healing effect, neither it has got aggravating effect. Then only you can use this as placebo. Otherwise, you are either increasing the deteriorating the condition, and in control group, obviously, you want the condition not to improve, and in experimental group, you want the condition to improve. So if you know that this particular oil deteriorates the condition, right? So it will add bias. Right? Similarly, if it has got some healing effect, then that may not be the suitable placebo even otherwise, right? So these are certain minor points, but very of highly significance, high significance, that often are missed in our research theses and also research papers. Placebo was given in the form of a capsule. No, this is not how we should be writing it. What did that capsule contain? Right? So, inadequate designing, description of the study protocol. What was the qualification of the physician who prescribed the control drug, phenytoin sodium, or where the antibiotics given along with the trial drug, maybe some ointment in the case of infective ulcers, no control group in the clinical trials involving very common conditions such as common cold, right, Pratishaya. What concentration of the solvent was used for extraction, what method of extraction was followed, how was the questionnaire to assess Prakriti constructed, how was it validated. So all these are certain details which are essential. Right? Vaguely defined identification procedure of the herb. Right? Mr. XYZ, a botanist of the institute, identified the herb. No, this is not sufficient. Right? Whether it was done based on morphology or SPTLC chemoprofiling or DNA fingerprinting or maybe other methods. So those methods should be mentioned. Right? No mentioning of the source of procurement. No mention of whether the voucher samples have been retained or not. What's the reference number of the sample? All these details are sometimes missing in our papers. Right? That has to be mentioned. Control group is not comparable with the experimental group. This is again another very common problem, right? All mild cases were enrolled in control group, and all severe cases were enrolled in intervention group, or vice versa. So this thing happens many a times where the bias comes into play. So this should be avoided. Right? So details of procedure involved in Varaha Putta, the temperature range, duration, instrument used, etc. should be given. Photograph of finished product is desirable, right? Where was it prepared? Where the good manufacturing practices followed? All this should be mentioned in your paper. Again, statistical significance and clinical significance. These are this is something which our students often are confused, right? Simply getting a statistical significance does not mean that there has to be some clinical significance, right? So you should be having some basic understanding of using statistics. Then only you will be able to interpret your findings. So state what test was used to determine whether difference between two or more groups was significant. Provide all details such as values of test statistics and confidence interval along with p-value and so on. So what is that after mean plus or minus, whether it is SD or SE, that should be clearly mentioned, right? Ensure that the numbers add up correctly. Define the technical terms that are specific to the methodology if the methodology is unconventional. So what I suggest is always consult a good statistician at the stage of protocol designing. Consult a good statistician during the data entry, because entry of the data in the spreadsheet also requires some basic understanding of statistics. Consult a good statistician while analyzing the results. Consult a good statistician while writing the paper. And the best practice is to have a statistician as a co-author. This is how we usually do. In most of our papers, we have a statistician as a co-author. So he will always help you in replying to reviewers' comments whenever there are some questions related to statistics. Coming to results. So in the results section, what is expected from you is what answers did you get and was the tested hypothesis true? So they have to be factual, right? All the results have to be factual. and time frame, response rate, sample characteristics, etc., are to be given. Tables should be self-explanatory, right, and understandable even without the text. And simplify and condense the tables, maybe merge 2 or more tables so that number of tables is minimized. Remove any table if the data is not related to the problem, and stick to the general rule: 1 non-text item per 1000 words. Non-text item means tables or figures, right? So provide sharp figures with the lettering proportionate to the size of the figure. Ensure that there is no manipulation in the photographs, whether intentional or unintentional. That comes under ethical violations. To reproduce a figure from other source, you need license or permission from the original author or the copyright holder. If your study is based on some visual parameter, then, for example, histopathology, you must provide the photographs of your slides. So is it all right to use this photograph? No, only this much you can use, because this is actually disclosing the identity of the patient. So always, in such cases, you may use some black colored the stripes before the eyes to hide the identity. So always de-identified information of patients should be given, right? Patient's identity should never be disclosed in any form. So results are reported selectively. This is another common problem. Percentages without frequencies, p-values without measure of effect, incomplete statistical analysis. For example, p-value given after applying ANOVA, but no post hoc test, right? So these are some very common problems that we encounter. Repetition of the results, both in table and in text. So there is no meaning in writing the same figure, same results again and again in the text as well as in the tables. Unrelated tables and figures are provided. Inaccurate interpretation of statistical results, no test applied to compare the means, and so on. And yeah, for example, see this graph: weight, BMI, and body fat percentage. But do the numbers indicate BMI? For example, 3.36. Can that be a BMI? No. But this is how our students commit errors, right? Again, serum cholesterol, more than 240 mg per dl, score 0. 200 to 239 mg per dl, score 10. So is it the way of doing the right thing? No, because when you have the exact absolute value of serum cholesterol, you should ideally be doing the mean and standard deviation, and then you should be applying the appropriate statistical test. So you cannot do this scoring. Actually, you are diluting. You are converting continuous data into discrete data. And discrete data always has a less value, right? Continuous data is always more precious, right? When you have continuous data with you, why do you want to dilute your data? All these examples have been taken from journals that are indexed with PubMed. Okay. So again, see, complete remission, 75 to 100% relief. So these are all vague things that our students often do. We should discourage them from doing this, because see, this is not a standard criteria, right? Always, for any disease, there are some standard accepted criteria for assessing the progress, right? So those criteria should be used instead of this vague criteria, right? Similarly, the redness, absent, mild, moderate, severe. How do you assess it? So these are all very vague criteria: swelling, no swelling, feeling of swelling and heaviness, apparent swelling. What's the difference between these three or four terms? Huge swelling. So this is a very vague thing, and we should discourage our students from doing this. Coming to discussion, I'll not take more than 5 minutes. If I'm allowed, I'll take 5 more minutes, because it is already 5 o'clock. Dr. Yogesh, can I go ahead for 5 minutes?
Yes, sir, you can take 5 minutes, and after that we have some queries from the audience.
Okay.
Session for 5 minutes more.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So what do your results mean in the context of existing knowledge, and how does it fit in with what other researchers have found, and what are the perspectives for future research? That should be included in discussion. State the main findings of the study. Discuss these findings with reference to previous research. Ensure that the interpretations match with the data. Discuss the implications of the new findings. analyze the strengths and accept the limitations of the study. There has to be always a paragraph where you should accept the limitations of your study. That makes your study more transparent. Okay, and then offer the perspectives for future studies and ensure that the data is adequate to support these conclusions. So these are certain things which have to be there in discussion, and I suggest that the supervisors or guides, they should help our students, their students, to write discussion, because writing the discussion is most difficult part of any research work, and this is where most of our papers fail in getting accepted with good journals. Everything is usually done up to the mark, but when it comes to discussion, our discussions are very weak because we don't include previous studies that have been carried out properly. We don't do proper review of literature, right? Review of literature. Without doing a good review of literature, we cannot write discussion. And a student cannot be expected to write good discussion because he has got a limited experience, whereas we as supervisors or guides, we have got vast experience in the given area because we have been working in the given area for several years. So we have more knowledge about the field than our student. Therefore, discussion, writing discussion should always be done with the help of supervisors or guides or senior authors. So these are some common problems. The references are out of date, right? So there are some papers that I have seen where none of the papers references is from last 10 years. All papers are at least 10 years old. That means he has published his thesis because he wanted some promotion or something, and without doing any further addition or deletion, he has published it as such, right? After 10 years, he must have published his thesis, derived work, right? So the discussion overstates the implications of the results. This is again another problem. The study is about something else, and when it comes to discussion and conclusion, you conclude something else. That is very, very common problem that we see in our students' work, right? Discussion does not acknowledge the limitations of the study. Again, there will be some limitations in each and every study, and those limitations should be acknowledged, and it is always better to give a separate paragraph for acknowledging the limitations. The last section is references. So functions of references is to give credit to the previous workers, to add credibility or authenticity to your statement, and to help readers find further information. So contribution of a paper to the science is often assessed on the basis of citations the paper or authors have received, and citation management software, maybe EndNote, Reference Manager, Citation Builder, or Mendeley, they are very useful, and you can use such software to write the reference section. And with this, I would like to conclude my talk. I thank the organizers for having given me this opportunity, and I would like to take up questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your elaborate presentation on how to write a research paper. Actually, there are two groups in our audience. One group is from the essay participants, and second group is from the PG PhD scholars. You have satisfied the second group, PG PhD scholars, and guided very well how to write the research articles. So I will request you to guide and share your experience as judge in the essay competition, and how the basic question from one participant is from Dr. Sangeeta Jadhav, how scientific essay writing differs from research article.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So essay writing is actually essays are usually longer articles that are not publishable in any good scholarly journals, because journals have got always limitations, word limits, maybe 5,000, 6,000, up maximum limit is 6,000. For any journal, if you go, even the best review article, right, won't allow you to this word limit. But they are usually longer, lengthier, and you can have you can build your opinion in your essays. Whereas in scientific articles, it is often difficult. And in essays, you can write something that doesn't have a concrete reference. But in scientific articles, you can't write anything without reference, because in essays, you can float your own ideas, right? And you can argue that yes, should be explored or something like that. So there is more scope for creativity when it comes to essays, right? Whereas in research articles or review papers, there is certain restriction. Always there is certain kind of restriction. Though you are creative, there is always some amount of restriction. That is the difference between an essay and a research paper. In essay, you can use good skills also. You can use excellent language, right? And the literature point of view also can be there in essays. But in scientific articles, nobody cares about the literary value of your paper. Always is evaluated, not the literature. But in essays, you can use your creativity in writing as well. This is again added advantage when it comes to essays. Each one has got its own limitations as well as advantages.
Now it is very clear that why we have organized the essay competition on concept of health. Like we have given some topics to elaborate. We have given the freedom of opinion and freedom of statement, and we have asked to substantiate the arguments with research references. That was the aim of this essay competition on concept of health. Thank you so much, sir, for your elaborate presentation and precise answer to the queries. I think there are two more queries from Kartikeya Pola, but these queries are already answered. He is saying that can we directly copy some content related to topic from published journals and other online sites? And how would plagiarism detected if we change the sentence formation? We have given a clear guideline for this plagiarism check. We have used the Viper software, and the website content is not to be copied as it is. The author has to in his own words.
Right? Exactly. Paraphrasing is something that is must.
Yeah. Yes, we have guided about the paraphrasing.
Sure.
Yes, and he is worried about is there any use if UG students participate in these type of competitions combined with PGs and PhDs. Actually, one of the intention is to catch them young. If
exactly
we see that the writing process is from within process, it doesn't need any qualification like UG or PG or PhD. There is invitation for a writer to express his ideas. So that
exactly
that was the
absolutely. I know several examples where my BAMS students in their maybe third year, fourth year BAMS students have published their maybe letters to editors in very good journals. One of them has published even in Nature, a small letter to editor. So that is how we inculcate the habit of writing and critical thinking. Not only writing, critical thinking is something that we want to inculcate in our young minds. That is why these essays and other competitions are always helpful. You don't consider it as a competition. You just consider it as a very good opportunity to express your views and improve your critical thinking skills.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your remarks.